From In the Beginning to the Musical Apocalypse, this is The Bible Says What? I'm your host, Mike Wiseman. You're rejecting Jesus. I hear it all the time. It's so confusing to me. How can I reject someone who has never shown up and asked anything of me? Jesus, if he ever existed, died a really long time ago, and for a lot of unfortunate reasons has become the invisible best friend of countless adults on this planet. I have never met the Christian demigod, and none of his friends seem to be able to introduce him to me. How is it my fault for not having a relationship with an invisible mute being? How can I be blamed for his hiddenness? Isaiah 65:1. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. I was found by those who did not seek me. At this point, who's rejecting who? Let's start the show.
Is there anything in the Bible that you yourself have an issue with? Okay, so it took you reading the Bible to realize that those things were bad for you?
Yeah, it actually did. I
Couldn't
didn't
figure this out on your own?
No, Ted Bundy could be redeemed. God doesn't kill children.
What do you think the Passover was? Yahweh sets up a whole system in the Old Testament where you slaughter animals just so he's able to forgive you.
Today's special guest is Christian author, podcaster, father, and husband, Christopher Lind. Welcome to the show, Christopher.
Hey, pleasure to meet you, Michael, and looking forward to chatting.
Thanks for coming on. Thanks for taking the time. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Wow, that is a big question. So my regular day job is I'm an HR executive for a big healthcare company. So that's kind of my primary job. But then I do a lot of work in the tech industry. So I'm an analyst in tech and just kind of keep a pulse on what's going on right now, which, as you're probably familiar with, there's a whole lot going on around tech and AI and where things are going and what does it mean for things. So there's no shortage of fodder
For
me
sure.
to follow. And then again, being a dad of 7 and a husband, that's honestly, I would say, my primary commitment. I'm super committed to my family, which is why I work from home. I love spending time with my kids.
Yeah, I'm sure that keeps you busy. Holy cow. Do you ever have kids?
That's why I
run
don't
into
have
your-
any hair. That's why I don't have any. It all fell off from up here and landed down here.
100%. Yeah, no, I can feel you there. Not the 7 kids, but the hair part.
You've got a way cooler beard than mine, though. I gotta say, yours is way more
thanks.
legit than.
Just takes time, care, special, So how long you been doing this?
Doing which part of it?
Oh, the AI, the tech part.
Oh, okay. So my backstory in this, I was a total geek in high school. I've always been wildly introverted. And so I had an uncle who worked in tech. And so I had access to computers when I was just a little kid, back before people even had them in their house.
Wow.
And so everybody just thought he's going to be a software. He's going to go build some tech. He's going to go do something like that because he's always in his room doing something with a computer that nobody understands. And I got into it and realized it was really boring to me. The tech itself wasn't all that interesting, but what I was really fascinated with it was changing people. I mean, it was just changing the way the world worked. And that was even back in my day where all of a sudden it was like, okay, this internet thing and this personal computer, and then it was the mobile phone, and I was watching how it was changing the landscape. And nobody really knew what to do with me because they're like, okay, here's this computer geek who's more interested in people. Like, how does it? So they actually said you should just teach. And so I did for a bit, but the traditional, I taught middle schoolers math and computer science.
Oh, thank you for your service. Holy cow, man.
Yes. Maybe that's where my hair went, actually.
Part of it there, probably, yeah.
Yeah, part of it. But the thing is the traditional academic system it bothered me because I went, this isn't really how people learn. You don't learn by sitting in a room and being talked at. And so it's always been at the heart of everything I did. So if anybody were to look me up on LinkedIn or something like that, you'd be like, oh, you've always been in learning. I'm like, well, sort of, but not really. I was always that quirky dude who had these weird niche roles. And so I've always studied
Yeah.
technology. I've always toyed with it. And so really, as far as I can think back, it's always been at the center of things.
Hmm. True. Oh, man. So what do you think about AI? How do you feel about it?
I talk to and consume a lot of content from all over the place.
Hmm.
And man, you hear people from all sides of this thing. I was just listening to Eliezer Yudkowsky. He's like, we got 2 years and that's it. Like
Oh,
the end of
man.
humanity. We're done. So you've got that end of it.
Yeah.
And then you've got folks on the other side who think, oh, this is nothing, you know, it's no big deal. It's just kind of the way the world works. We'll just kind of adapt to it. I tend to find myself seeing truth in all of it.
Yeah.
I think there is some real terrible things we're going to see and experience in the next few years. I think the next few years are going to be pretty radical. But I also think in many ways, I mean, I talked to some people who are doing incredible things with AI, and I think there's amazing things we can do with it. I just talked to somebody yesterday where we figured out how to cure dyslexia with AI. And you're like,
Wow.
well, I mean, that's awesome. And then you hear things where it's like, well, and also you can build a robot that you can fall in love with that will ultimately turn you into a narcissist. And you're like, okay, well, probably not a good use. So it's just all over the map. And that's where
That's an interesting one. Yeah.
I tend to love the beauty and horror of what it is.
Gotcha. What do you fear most about the AI?
I'm actually, so two things. One, I'm more concerned what we will do with it than the AI itself. If you look over the course of human history, I tend to study human history a lot, and the choices we will make with it, I think, will be far more destructive than the AI is. You know, some people were like, oh, the AI is going to show up at your house, and you're like, well, honestly, if they do, they're going to be really efficient about it, and you're going to be dead before you even know what hit you. So it's probably not like, really, I wouldn't be that concerned about that. But I think, so that to me is concerning, is what we will do with it, the choices we will make. And then I think the other thing is we tend to, as a society, move so quickly. We don't think, what are the possible implications of this that we're not considering? And I think there's going to be a real challenge that we may make some really stupid decisions.
Oh, guaranteed.
And we just don't realize, it's a stupid decision. And we're seeing that with social media. Nobody thought adding a like button to a social platform would cause the highest era of depression and loneliness than we've ever seen in human history. And it's like, I don't go Zuckerberg's the Antichrist, because it's like, well, he's a kid. He was making a thing and he thought it was good. And it just, we didn't know what we didn't know. And I think I think people are going to be deceived by a lot of things and just not realize it till it's too late.
That is scary. That is scary. I mean, I've watched Jurassic Park. I know what can happen when we move too fast and don't think. I mean,
yeah, we built this great island with all these prehistoric dinosaurs. Like, what could possibly go wrong? And
let's bring him to San Diego. You know, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yeah, no, those are some definite concerns for sure. Man, what do you think we can do to maybe stifle some of those concerns? Things we can do to help out, quench some of those fears.
I think, one of the reasons I do my podcast is because even though as a Christian, it's not a Christian podcast. So my podcast really is about just helping people understand this and understanding all the complexity of it. I think right now in society, we tend to polarize everything and strawman everything. And it's not helpful to people because it leads to ignorance. And so I think education is part of it. I mean, I'm a learning person. So to me, it's like, well, you can't fight against what you don't know. So if you don't truly understand and actually understand all sides of it, not just what your tribe is telling you, like, oh, well, my conservative Christian tribe says AI is, you're dealing with a demon. Like, well, okay, maybe you should look beyond just what your Christian tribe is telling you to see what else is out there. And I mean, I really think that is a clear path. But I think the other thing, I know somebody who specializes in identifying counterfeits. And one of the things that they talk about with identifying counterfeit dollar bills is you don't study the counterfeits, you study the truth. You study the real deal. And so I think even if you're not a Christian per se, studying human history, studying how we've done things, studying the way things have happened in the past. And I think there's a lot of, personally, I think the Bible has a ton of wisdom, whether you're a believer or not. You can be like, I reject these parts of it, but still I can look at this and go, there's some things we can probably take from this that would actually help us not repeat this cycle. Because again, I think Solomon is right when he says nothing is really new under the sun. Even this AI age, it's like, it is new, but it's also not. It's a different flavor of things we've always done. And I think if we take the time to do that and slow down, I think that's another big one. I'm like, slow down, people. Slow down a little bit. Take time to think. Engage with people who are different than you. Understand their points of view. Why do they think the way they think? What things do they see that you're not seeing? I think that's how we actually fight against this, because then the tribalism actually makes us more vulnerable. It honestly does.
Yeah. No, it's for sure. And then conversations like this, I mean, I think that helps out a lot for sure. We can just sit down and hash things out and figure out why we believe what we believe, which is where we're going.
Exactly.
So the Christianity, where does the Christianity fit into all of this for you?
So
the AI stuff.
Yeah, the AI stuff. So when I look at it, where the Christianity piece fits in for me is I look at the biblical story and I look back throughout the whole Bible, and you can see a pattern, which is people have a way of, they want to do it themselves. They always think they know they're right. And we make super big mistakes along the way. And to me, that's where the AI piece comes in, where we go, well, we have these bad tendencies to exploit the vulnerable, to let power and control rule us. And we want to pursue our own desires, often at our own peril. And we don't realize it's at our own peril until it's too late. So regardless of whether you're a Christian or not, but the Bible talks about that all over the place. So then for me, I'm like, well, okay, that's lessons we can take from that. For me personally, where the Christian piece is, like, I talk to a lot of people who go, how can you say legitimately the world could be destroyed by technology in 5 years? And how can you say that with just like, and if it does, okay. And for me, it's like, well, because I have a hope that it's outside of, there's something bigger than just me and what's going on here and what I can see. And I think that really, that hope for me, that's where the Christian story comes in, is I'm like, well, I believe that there is something bigger and that we don't need to worry about that. And I think that's what helps me navigate some of this stuff.
Do you think that AI will eventually take over and we'll probably blame it on the tribulation or the rapture and all that, if you believe in all that? I mean, I don't want to straw man you.
No. Well, because here's the thing. So, I mean, that to me is some of the Christian tribalism that I see seeping into this AI discussion. And I was telling you before we started recording, like, I sometimes get into it more with other Christians than I do with non-Christians, because I'm like, you're more concerned about whether what is going on in Israel and Russia is the book of Revelation coming to life than living in reality of what's happening today and seeing how can we actually make a difference. So
there you go.
Do I think AI will completely dominate and take over things? I think if it gets to that point, it's only because God's allowed it to happen. He's kind of said, I'm giving you what you want. You want it your own way? Go for it. Do I think
Kinda
we'll
like
go
when
there?
they wanted
To
a
me,
king.
I'm like, yeah. Kind
so-
of like when he wanted a king, and they were like, and Samuel's like, no, this is a bad idea, guys. You don't want a king. I'm telling you, you don't want a king. It's going to be, here's all the reasons why it's a bad thing. And they said, give us a king like our pagan nations. And they went, and God goes, give it to him then. Give him the king. They know
even
the
though
risks,
he knew
they know the
bad
worms.
things, the bad things that would happen with it. So let's with the AI, for instance, God knows if there would be bad things that would happen to it. And it's like my kids, if they were wielding a dangerous weapon, I wouldn't be like, oh, well, there you go. He's just gonna let him have it. He really wants it, so I'm just gonna let him have it. I mean, I would step in as a loving father, I'd be like, no, this is going to hurt you. I'm going to take it away from you and lock it up somewhere. But what I hear
Well,
from
and I was
God
actually
is
on a podcast. Well, and I think this is where, again, it just depends on
Hmm.
the situation you're looking at. So let's say, like my kids are all under 12.
Hmm.
If they started wielding a weapon in the garage, and it wouldn't be very loving of me to be like, well, I guess they really want
Yeah.
it. So like,
Yeah.
shoot your sibling. Like,
Oh,
you will be
jeez.
kids.
Kids will be
But
kids.
yeah, kids will be
It's
kids.
terrible.
But I think you think about some of the more difficult situations
Hmm.
where, let's say you're a parent of a child who's in their mid 20s and they're addicted to drugs, and they're always coming back to you going, hey, I need more money. Can I stay with you? Like, at what point do you go, it's not loving for me to continue enabling this behavior. So I love
Step
you,
in.
but I'm going to let you go to it.
Oh.
And I need to step away, and I need you to make some of those mistakes.
Hmm.
And I hope that you learn, and I'm going to let you run through the muck and the mire. I think of the prodigal son, where it's like the
Hmm.
dad let him go. He let him burn all the cash. He let
Hmm.
him work with the pig. He let him do it. But the second his son went, I made a huge mistake, and came running back, he didn't cross his arms and go, you idiot. Like, I could have told you this, you moron. Like, what do you are going to work as a servant. So I
Hmm.
think it's tough. And I think that's the nuance of kind of where we are. Somebody asked me the other day, they're like, so do you think God will intervene? And I'm like, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
Yeah. But when we can realize that that's probably not a good idea, is to let the kids wield the gun, or have their
True.
way, for such
True.
things. And God knew that the king would be a bad idea because they would cause a lot of death and destruction. But he allowed it anyways. He allowed them to choose death and destruction instead of stepping in and saying, no, I'm your king. That's it. End of story.
True.
I'm God. I know better type thing.
Yep.
I mean, he
Yep.
did that with the drowning of the kids. He knew better, so he just drowned all the kids. I mean, that's his thing. Hellfire. Do you believe in hell? Is that a thing?
So it's more complicated than I think
Hmm.
the typical Christian straw man paints it up to be. And I think it actually very much ties to what we're talking about right here, where I think the typical cultural Christian answer to that is, you go through life, you do enough good things, you do enough bad things, you make the right decisions, and at the end there's like a checklist, and God goes, up, hey, you're in, here's the party,
Hmm.
go hop around on clouds. Oh, sorry, you didn't. You go to the bad place, you're going to be tortured for all of eternity, and all this other stuff.
Hmm.
I think my take on it is, whatever happens when we're done here is God's way of kind of going, you want nothing to do with me. You want nothing to do with me. And similar to AI, there may be a lot of things that you experience today that you don't realize are good gifts that I'm allowing you to have, even though you've rejected me. But at some point, I am going to say, you don't want anything to do with me. I will give you what you want. You want nothing. You're going to get all of that. And it's just what that looks like. I don't know, but I don't think it's what we often think of, the Dante's Inferno type stuff. And
Yeah.
actually, even my deeper, if you were to, and this is where Christians end up spending more time arguing with each other than just caring about their neighbor. That drives me nuts. But I think where I've landed on the hell thing is, I'm probably more in the camp of annihilationist, where it's like, you just, like, that's it.
God goes, and you go, wee, and that's it.
Well,
And there's no more.
you're done. Like, that's
Yeah.
it. You want nothing to do with me. It's just, that's it. That's the end.
So,
but again, I don't know.
thank you for that. Let's go back to the prodigal son, though, a little bit there. If the prodigal son had said, or the prodigal dad, I guess, had said, I want nothing to do with you, depart from me, and annihilates him, that doesn't sound like much of a good story there. Or the kid comes back after, realizing it sucks, and then, tra-la-la. But what God does is he annihilates, according to your belief structure there. So wouldn't it be better if the more loving act would be just, you can live without me, as opposed to, I'm going to annihilate you because you don't love me and you don't want to be around me? So I mean, as a father, we wouldn't do that. We would create a space that would be a safe place apart from us, that they would be happy. That's what I would do. I wouldn't annihilate them because they don't want to spend time with me.
But I think this is where, and this just again, I think it's just different worldviews that we're coming from. What I think we
Definitely.
struggle to understand as people, well, yeah, well, definitely. I think what we struggle to understand is like the goodness of creation, existence. And this goes back to Genesis.
Mm.
It only exists because God's holding, like his goodness is keeping it all in check.
Okay.
So when he lets that go, and I think of Genesis 6, the flood story,
Mhm.
right? The flood story. What you're seeing is when he kind of turns his back and says, "You want nothing to do with me, I'll turn my back," it just collapses in on itself. And so I think it's different than this, like, oh, you
Interesting.
reject me, like pew 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 pew, like I'm gonna like zap you with this vaporizer. It's just more like, you want nothing to do with me. It all kind of like it just collapses in on itself. So it's not
Huh.
even necessarily he's vaporizing or, annihilating you. It's more just like, well, if you want nothing to do with me, everything that is good is me holding it together. If you truly
Hmm.
step away and reject, it just collapses in on itself. It's not, and that's just the way I've processed it through the book of Genesis and how I see creation and God's basically the way he's holding it together.
I'm just going to poke at that for a minute. Thank you.
Sure.
So God, the flood, for instance, during the flood, the gates or the windows to the magic space water were opened, and
Correct.
it flooded the earth. Who sent the wrathful rainwater?
So my interpretation and my understanding of this, and also I've spent a lot of time studying Genesis, and water is both my take on it. And again, Christians argue for centuries over this, is
Mhm.
it's both real and symbolic. So going back to Genesis, the flood story, the water of Genesis 6 is also used in Genesis 1, and it describes chaos, right?
Mm.
It's whatever it is before God actually enacts his breath of life, his speaking into existence. It's just kind of the chaos craziness of things.
Okay.
And he separates it. And so the waters go above and below, and he creates basically the safe space in between it.
Mhm.
And so when the flood happens, he basically is stepping back going, that's what you want, that's what's going to happen. But
Mm.
what's going to happen is it's all going to collapse in on itself. And so it's less of God going, I'm consciously choosing to, I mean, again, I don't know the mind of God, but how it all plays out,
Uh-huh.
when I see it, it's just like it collapses in on itself. It's like if you pulled the foundation of a house out,
Uh-huh.
you're like, well, it collapses because there's nothing to hold it together anymore.
Well, it's kind of if the foundation of the house pulled itself out at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. And why
Kind
would
of.
God pull his protection from us? Why would he just decide, hey, you know what? You don't want me around. Again, it's the same thing. I'm going back to our kids. If our kids don't want us around, we're not going to just turn our backs and let a car hit them. We're not going to drown them in the pool. I mean, we are
No,
going to stay there and protect them regardless.
But,
yeah.
Well, and this is where we might disagree. If my kids are adults, okay, if my kids are adults and they go through a state, and I've had to wrestle with this because, and some of this goes back to my own challenges with my biological mom. If my kids as adults said, I hate you, Dad, I want nothing to do with you, leave me alone, like, don't talk to me, that would break my heart. I would be brokenhearted over that. But if they said, I don't want you calling me, I don't want you texting me, I don't want you doing any of this. Out of love, I actually would say, I respect and love you enough. I will respect and respect your wishes. But no, that door is always open. I will never close that door to you.
And will never drown you.
If you want to come in, I will never hold your head underwater and say, that's it. I will say, I love you enough to let you do that. And at any point you can come back through. And I actually think that is the invitation of Jesus, is saying, I am the door. You can come back at any point. All you have to do is say, I want back. And I think that's where, that's how I see it. And so for me, I'm like, there are times where people just go, I don't want back, period.
Well,
I don't ever want back. And God goes, well, okay.
Take it one step further, though. They don't want back, but you're going to send a flood, or there's a natural disaster. Let's just say there's a tornado at their residence, and you have the power to drive over there, warn them, and save them. Now, they don't want anything to do with you. Would the right thing to be just to ignore it and let them, well, they didn't want anything to do with me. I can't save them because they don't want anything to do with me. Or would the right thing to do be going over there and saving them because and you have the power to do it, regardless if they don't want to be around you or not? Would that be a better situation?
It's a fair pushback.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a fair pushback, but I think where the challenge I see with the argument is it's coming from an assumption that God isn't warning people today, that he isn't saying, hey, I'm here. Like, I care for you. It's assuming none of that stuff's happening.
I'm going to assume that because I don't see that or hear that, Christopher. That's why I'm going to assume.
And that's where I would say I don't agree with that. And I think there are signs everywhere. And even the fact, like, we're having this conversation, like, it's like there are people in your life, there are people you're talking to.
There's people, but there's not God coming in, though. There's not God coming in and saying, hey, don't do this. It's people. Now, can you point to a point where God actually steps in and says, hi, I'm God. Don't do that. I mean, or is it just people I guess again, and common sense?
So in two things to that. Yeah. One, I think from the biblical story, God works through people notoriously. Notoriously, God works through people. So I don't necessarily think, oh, well, if he works through people, it doesn't count. I think, well, he works through people all the time. But then if you do look at where he actually does come down, there's lots of examples where the angel of the Lord shows up, whether it's
not in real life, though. This is Bible. These are Bible stories. I'm talking about real life, like to me, to you, to the world. Does he show up and say, hey, by the way, I'm real. This thing you're doing is bad.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
No. So I'll give a personal example, of this. And again, this is where sometimes I go, well, my goal is never to try and convince somebody I'm right, but more to say, here's my interpretation. So your interpretation is they're just Bible stories. My interpretation is they're true. So I look at it and go, well,
God
I see those
truly did
true.
all those things.
So he truly did those things. And again, in Jesus was God. I believe he was God, and he did show up. And we have historical records that shows he showed up and something happened because his body disappeared. So again, we
don't really know anything and we can't confirm it. So that's not really great. I mean, but God is all powerful and all knowing, right? He knows exactly what it would take to convince the world, but yet he refuses to do it. He stays hidden. He doesn't have to change everybody's minds. He knows exactly what it would take to convince me, particularly to convince my wife, to convince my kids that he's a real, actual entity, but he doesn't do it. He stays hidden and apparently only reveals himself to some people.
Well, again, I don't have all the answers to this one. I don't. But here's a personal example, okay, where I personally felt this experience is when I was 19 years old. I had a very traumatic childhood. When I was 19 years old, I was done. I was done. I was done with life. And I walked out to a bridge. I hung my feet over the edge. I was counting cars, timing it. Like, I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm done. And a bright light hit me and just said, this is not how it has to end. And that was it. And it was one of those, like, what the heck was that? Like, I really still have no words to describe what it was. All I knew was something said, this is not how it has to. And again, it wasn't saying you're not going to do this. It was, this isn't how it has to end. And that was enough. I turned around. I'm like, I still can't even make sense of what that was. Was this just a hallucination? Was this dopamine in my head because of fear? Like, was this God showing up? But whatever it was, something hit me over the head. Now, I think the challenge, though, is I think a lot of people, and even myself at times, we don't really want to seek out God. We don't really want to seek him out. And I think we sometimes underestimate how much power and authority he's actually given to us when he created us and said, you have the power to choose. And if you choose, I'm not going to seek you out.
That's his choice. That's his choice. His choice is to not seek me out. He had his chance. I was a Christian for most of my life.
So what is your story? Like, because I'm actually curious.
I grew up in the church.
What ended up making you change?
I read the Bible. And I started asking questions. Okay. That's what made me change. And none of my questions are answerable. God never shows up. The Bible is full of horrific things that God does and says and wants done. So yeah, and then I mean, he's a documented child killer, Christopher. I refuse to worship a documented child killer or befriend one for that matter, especially an invisible one that never shows up to my birthday party. I mean, there's just all kinds of just negativeness here. Yeah, I understand the hope for the afterlife and all that, and Jesus saved us from what his dad was going to do, and I understand that that sounds good to some people, but when you really deep dive into it, it's a horrible, horrible thing. Right off the bat, Christopher, would you slaughter the innocent to forgive the guilty? Would that be a choice you would make?
So here's the thing with that one. Okay.
Hmm.
I think the challenge I have with that, and this is where I look at Job. The book of Job to me is
Hmm.
one that there have been lots of things over the years that I've wrestled with.
Yeah.
There's lots of stories in the Old Testament I still struggle with.
Hmm.
And I'm like, what is going on here? And what are you doing? And I think when I've run into that, what I've found is I actually don't have the mind of God, and I can't possibly understand that. But two things that have
Hmm.
really shaped the way that I look at things is one, because of some of the things I experienced growing up,
Hmm.
I've seen the horror of what people can do. And I
Yeah.
think we often like to think people are generally good. We're good on the inside. We do good. And I'm like, I think we underestimate how horrible people really can be. And when
Hmm.
just left to our own devices, we do terrible, terrible, terrible things. And I
We
think
also
I
do
used
really
to read
good
the Old
things,
Testament.
though. We also do
We
really
do.
good things. I think it's a fair balance. I think there are a lot of jerks out there. 100%. Pol Pot, Hitler, all those kind of assholes. For sure. But anybody that slaughters masses, such as God, I deem a jerk. And I wouldn't worship them.
So which
And I don't,
which stories
yeah.
specifically where does that come from? Like he slaughters masses. Like which ones in
Well,
particular?
we talked about the
are
flood.
you
That's
thinking
number
of?
one. He wiped out the entire
Okay.
planet. There's another one we can go to, the Passover. What happened during the Passover? Did he give all the kids in bed while they were sleeping kisses and good night lollipops? No, he slaughtered them in their sleep. He slaughtered kids in their sleep because their parents didn't put the right blood on the door. That's disgusting. That's horrible. He slaughtered David and Bathsheba's kid. Why? Because the enemies showed contempt to him because of David's sin, so the kid had to die. And it's just horrible. He sends she-bears after a bunch of. There's so many stories and so many threats. Hosea 9:16. I will slay your cherished offspring. Why? Because they worshipped another god. Because he's jealous. He is a jealous God. His name is jealous, he says. There's lots of things wrong with this. I mean, you can tell me he's loving till you're blue in the face, but the book tells me he slaughters kids for stupid reasons. And then he's going to annihilate me because I don't love him back. He's not going to set me up in a paradise somewhere without him. No, he wants to annihilate me. He has to slaughter the innocent to forgive the guilty. There is no forgiveness without bloodshed, he says. Hebrews 9:22. I don't work that way. I know you don't work that way. I'm pretty sure you don't work that way anyways. I hope not. We're rational
No,
human beings.
I don't.
We can think of
No,
these things as bad, right? I mean, we can look at them and say, these are bad ideas. These are coming from the God that millions of people are saying is perfect and loving. Bad ideas coming from a perfect, loving being doesn't make that being perfect and loving anymore. That changes the whole aspect of it. So that's where I'm at. He's a monster from what I read and what I see.
And again,
Yeah.
I can understand how somebody could come to that conclusion. And there have been
Yeah.
plenty of times where that has been, I've had to wrestle with that. And I've gone, so what are you doing here, God? Like, and I guess for me, I've read through it enough times where I don't see it through that lens. I don't see it as this jealous vengeance. He's coming back and killing the innocent. And
That's what he calls
example
himself,
that jumps to
though.
mind.
That's what he says.
Jealous
He
in the
says his name
sense-
is jealous. He says he is jealous, slaughtering the
But
kids of the sinners.
But
Like,
don't
that's
you
what he
think you're reading
says.
your own interpretation of what jealous looks like into that?
He's killing people because of what they're doing. He's jealous that
rejected
he's
him.
not getting all of their attention. So he's going to kill them and their kids. How am I reading that wrong?
Because I really am not trying to argue and say that you're
I just
interpreting.
want to
Like,
know,
I'm really
how does it
not.
work?
I'm really
How's
not.
it work for you, though?
For
Like, 'cause
me,
that's
But
Go ahead,
because in
yeah.
my head, there's a couple things. One,
Yeah.
when I think of Abraham standing with God as he's looking over Sodom and Gomorrah, as God has said, I'm going to destroy it. And first of all, the fact God showed up and said, I'm coming to see if it's as bad as it is. I'm coming to see.
Lot.
And Abraham argues with him and says, will you spare it if there's 50 righteous? If there's 45, if there's 40, if
Right.
there's 10? And God says, yeah, I will.
So none of
And I
those
think it
kids
goes
and none of
back
those
to
women
a
were
wrong
good.
assumption.
It was
Well,
all
so
the
again,
men
it
in
depends on your definition. It
the
depends on
story.
what you're defining good.
Right. In the story, it says, well, I'm pretty sure children are pretty innocent and they don't deserve hellfire and rain of fire from the heavens. But that story in particular, there are women and children in that city, correct? And
I mean,
during
we don't know for sure, but we have to assume, sure.
we have to assume it can't be just a town of men. I mean, I guess it could. Anyways, so in the story, it's just the men that want to go in there and assault the angels, essentially. And then, he says, oh, you could take my daughters instead. Such a great man. Such a righteous man, that guy. But they're all men. They're all men that do the bad thing. So the women and children are still at home. We can assume that, right? We can assume that the women and children are not in the streets because it says that all the men of the town did it. So the women and children are at home sleeping, and they're all bad, according to God. And they all deserve to die by asteroid or whatever it was, the hellfire from heaven fire. I don't know. Anyways. So though you're telling me that the kid sleeping in his cradle is not innocent and that God has to destroy him.
No, and I think this goes back to, I don't think any of us are innocent. And that's the thing. I think that's
According
where
to who?
Paul in Romans, when he says, all have fallen short.
Right.
I
who
truly
thinks we've
believe
fallen
not a
short?
single one of us, by God's standard.
God's standards.
Who is the creator? But going back to Isaiah 45, if you actually believe that God is the creator,
Mhm.
in Isaiah 45, he talks about who says to the creator, you suck at what you created. I think you're not doing a good. Well, and he allows you to do that. But
but then he
you to
kills
do that.
people for doing that. That's not right. That's not right. We
But
should
you
be able to
do- but you
challenge
want nothing
God.
to do with him. But by your own admission, you want nothing to do with him. You want the creator. You want the creation, but you don't want the creator. And that is true. By
'Cause
your
he's a
own admission,
monster.
you're like, I want everything good, but I don't want anything to do with you, God.
Yes, because
And
he's
I
a
think
monster.
God has a right to say, it doesn't work that way. You don't get everything by your own standards.
His rule. That's his rule. Yeah, that's his rule.
But he created everything. So who else's rules would there be?
Right, exactly.
Who else
So
gets
we're
to
all
make the
under
rules
his
except
rules.
the creator?
And I can't
I mean, he
complain about his
created that.
rules.
Again, this is just a difference in submission. I believe God is the creator. He knows far more than I do.
Gotcha.
And so if he says these are the rules,
Yeah.
I don't see myself in a position to go, screw you, God. I know better than you. And I think that's the human condition. I think that's a human condition that we've seen. That's what starts in Genesis 3. Adam and Eve go, I can't eat this fruit. Screw you, God. I'm going to eat this fruit.
I don't remember that part.
I can eat this fruit. You can't tell me I can't eat this fruit. And that's what we see. And God goes, well, eat the fruit.
I don't
then
see
you
that
can't be in
part.
the garden.
Man, there's so much there I want to talk about that. But I want the kids. Where do you think the kids go that are guilty, not innocent? Where do you think these kids go that God kills?
So ultimately, my take on this is, if God ultimately knows everything, he knows before we do who's actually going to reject him and who's going to accept him.
Oof.
So I think we're very limited. My personal interpretations, we're very limited in our thinking. We're operating on a time scale. We just can't see things. And I think even in my career, that has helped shape some of that, because when you sit at the executive level, you see things different than the people who are, in the trenches doing the work. And so you see things that they don't see. And so it's very easy for them to go, well, this is stupid, or this doesn't mean. It's like, well, but you also don't have the whole picture. And so I think when I look at it, do I think anybody who ultimately would surrender and say, God, I want you and I'm willing to play by your rules? Do I think anybody who's willing to do that is going to be rejected? I don't. I don't think anybody will.
Right.
So
you
whether
have
they're
to submit to
kids,
him
like,
yeah. So what about the kids that didn't do that? Though?
Yes.
What about the ones he killed in the Passover? What about those kids? Those evil Egyptian kids that worship the wrong God. He killed them in their sleep. Do they just get annihilated? Do they get to go to heaven? What happens there?
But I think you're oversimplifying it in the sense that God doesn't work on our time scale. So yes, you can make people really upset about it by going, "Oh, he killed these poor innocent kids."
Yes.
I think
that's pretty
God looks
upsetting.
at it and goes, but God looks at it and goes, "I know what those children will become. And
Wow.
I know that if they're going to become righteous, which righteous isn't doing good things, it's putting your trust in him."
Yeah. It's loving God.
I think God's big enough to go, even if they died, I'm eternal. So it
Yeah.
doesn't mean they went away. They just come to me sooner than later. Like, quite frankly, I don't look at going to God sooner than later as like a bad thing. I think some people do because they're like, if this life is all you have, then of course it sounds terrifying to leave this planet, leave this earth sooner. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't.
So what
To
happens to those
me,
kids, though?
God's working on a
So
bigger.
they get to go to heaven? The Egyptian kids that don't worship Yahweh get to go to heaven when he kills them?
If God ultimately knows that they would not play by his rules and say, "Screw you, God, I want your creation, but I don't want anything to do with you,"
Uh-huh.
then I think he would say, "Fine,
Did he create
you
those
can
kids?
have what you want." Of course he did.
Did he create those kids knowing what they would do?
Again, this goes back to my take on, I think God has given us one of the challenging and really difficult things is when you give people free will, they have a choice. And God continues to say, you can come back at any point, but it's your choice. And you also will live with the consequences of your choice.
But they're dead.
And so but again, from my perspective, God knows how it all would have played out anyway. And he knows where their heart would have been.
So he created them
so-
knowing he would have to kill them and destroy them
That
when they were
but again,
children.
this is where we're coming at it differently.
Yeah.
You're saying he did it so he could punish them. I'm looking at it saying he did it saying he did it knowing that they would go, "I want nothing to do with you, and just let me go back and collapse into oblivion because I want nothing to do with you." And he goes, "Okay."
So why would he create those beings then?
This goes back to I don't even pretend to know that I know the mind of God and that I can
love the I
imagine
don't know
what
answers.
he's doing.
But does that make sense to you? To create a being that is destined to go to nothing.
I don't disagree that it's extremely hard.
Yeah.
Even for me, like I don't disagree one bit. It's extremely hard sometimes where I go, why would you do it? It doesn't make any sense to me. And I don't know why. And I think this is where sometimes I get really feisty with Christians because Christians act like they have all the answers sometimes. Oh, well, it's because of this and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I'm sorry, we don't know the answers either. And so there's a lot of stuff that even personally, I still go, why on earth would you let all this happen? And if you knew what was good, like, it doesn't always make sense to me. But I think where we just come from different perspectives is I operate off the assumption that you created it. I believe you're good and you're just. And that whatever it is, whether I can make sense of it or not, I do trust that one, you don't punish someone who would ultimately choose you. I truly believe you won't punish someone who would ultimately choose you.
Why would he punish somebody that doesn't choose him? That's the weird part. Punishing somebody that doesn't choose you.
So I've got a personal example for this, okay? Because I think punish is a word that, again, gets people feisty in this. He allows them to suffer the consequences of their own choices.
The plan he set in motion, though, that's all of his plan. So again, why does he have it this way? Why does he want it to be that way? Why does he want people who reject him to be punished?
And that I don't have an answer for. And
does
I
that
won't
make
even
sense?
pretend to speak on his. I absolutely, and I will say I have wrestled with that just like you have. I've wrestled with a lot of these things where I go, even the whole like, why are you taking so long? Like for me as a Christian, I'm like, Jesus, like I see the destruction going on.
I can tell
in the
you why,
world.
but
I
you're not
see
going to like
what's
the
happening
answer.
in AI. No, I know what your answer would be. But even for me as a Christian, I go, God, it doesn't make sense sometimes. Like, why don't you just come back and fix it? You could, but I spent the whole last year reading through the Bible, specifically looking for his periods where he makes people wait and what he does in that period of waiting. And even the book of Judges, you're like, why did you let that whole book of Judges, like it's just this death spiral of Israel just going worse and worse and worse. Like, why did
Yeah.
you do that? Like, I can't make sense of it. But I think for me, it goes back to, I do trust he's got a bigger plan than I will ever understand. And I think that's just a conclusion where I can hold intention that it's like, you've looked at it and you've come to a different conclusion than I have. And I've looked at it and I go, I've come to a different conclusion on, I don't have the answer, but my assumptions about God are he's good, he's just, he's not going to do it.
Why do you think he's good and just? Where does this idea come from? We've just talked about him slaughtering a bunch of kids for no reason, destroying people that don't love him. Where does the good part come in?
I think that's where the gospel comes into play. And the fact that he sent
Jesus.
Christ. Yep.
So
to ultimately say, I know, and this was the realization that finally brought me to Christ. I was tired of trying to be God. I was tired of trying to be God.
Gotcha.
And be like, I make the decisions. I know what's best. I can.
You're in control of your own life.
Because I was tired of just, I'm in control of my own life.
You are.
I know what's best. And I'd watched how much I sucked at that. When I played by my rules, I failed. And I was tired of failing all the time. And I realized there's no self-help book. There's no thing that I'm going to do that's going to magically fix. I'm going to continue to struggle with this. And I think that's where I look at what Jesus did. And Jesus said, I know that. I know that. I know you're fundamentally incapable of.
What do you mean you look at what Jesus
living
did?
up to my. Well, he came to die and pay the ultimate penalty for all of our sins.
But why? Why did he have to die?
How that whole thing works?
Yeah, that's weird. But why? Why did he have to die?
Because go back to, I think for me, when I look at it, my interpretation is there is some sort of cosmic justice that I will never understand in the way God's created things, where ultimately we've all rejected him. We've all turned from him. We've all sinned. Upset. And he says, well, no, it goes back to justice.
He's hurt.
I mean, think of if somebody came into your house and killed your kid, would you be fine with just going like, well, their choices? Like,
you mean like God did with the Egyptians?
Let them do
when
it.
He just came into their house and killed their kids?
Well, but reverse it.
Should we just worship them?
Came in and killed your house. No, but would you be just fine if they got off and somebody said, well, we just kind of. And I think that's the thing with sin. God says, you guys have made a mess of my world.
What is
You've
sin?
wrecked it.
What is sin? Not loving him, things like that? Things that he doesn't
sin is
like.
anytime we miss the mark. The term, the Greek or the Hebrew is actually just you miss the mark.
Yeah, it's an archery term or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's an archery term based on God's the architect.
We missed the perfection that God wants us to be. And the perfection is laid out in his Old Testament laws. These are perfect, holy, righteous, and good. These are the ways that people are supposed to perform or act, I guess. This is how God wants it. This is God's perfect idea of what people should be doing. Right? Am I right?
I've got my interpretation of it's a little bit different. I think if anything, the law was designed to show us you can't do this. Like you're not good enough. No,
it says it's super easy to
follow.
follow.
Keep it up.
Oh man, yeah, we're gonna go there because now I want to figure out that verse because it definitely says that the law is not hard to follow. Do the law is there. It is 1 John 5:3. For this is the love of God that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. Deuteronomy 30:11 says, for this commandment that I command you today is not too hard for you. So I mean it doesn't say anywhere that it's too hard to follow.
Well, but I think it goes back to and again, it's just a different understanding of what it is. So Jesus says to follow all the laws, but Jesus sums up all the laws and the prophets can be summed up in love the Lord and love your neighbor.
Christopher.
Okay, so somehow I don't
have you read those laws? Yeah, I mean, I've read those laws.
No, I know.
Burning witches.
I know, and that's where I know, and that's where again this goes back to I don't understand how all that can be summed up.
Right, and we can use our rational human brains and go, that doesn't make any sense because in Leviticus it tells me to burn my prostitute daughter. It tells me to cut off my wife's hand if she reaches out.
There's some weird stuff in there.
These are not love your neighbor. It says to slaughter your neighbor in several places. Why? Because they worship the wrong God. It impregnates. Oh man, this is a great one. Deuteronomy 25:7. That guy who's going to impregnate his sister-in-law, but on the floor instead. So God's like, oh, you die. Like this is not love your neighbor. This is not love over evil reaction or
but
over
like
the top
like you, and this is probably where we're similar. Okay, here's where we're similar. I have wrestled with these same things that you have. Okay.
How do
I've
you?
looked at these things and gone, I am struggling to understand what does this mean? And that's
Yeah.
where for me, I've then had to just sit on it for a bit and be like, what are you actually trying to communicate? And again, it's an
Hmm.
assumption. And I think this is where we don't realize our cognitive biases end up influencing so much of what we do.
My common sense
So,
influences most of it, actually. I mean, you can tell me this
well,
guy's
but
loving,
even
but
for
he's doing
me,
these
as
bad
I've,
things. My common sense kicks in and goes, no. Then you tell me that the law is all loving, and then I read the laws and it's not. My common sense goes, no. So I'm using my common sense to rationalize these ideas. And when they don't rationalize together, I see them as flawed, as false, as not truth. How do you
and
see
again,
these as not flawed in truth?
because again, my experience in this is when I've actually taken the time to understand what is it really communicating in the current cultural context, not the current like ours, in theirs. What is it actually trying to do? How is it trying to make them stand out
Burn
amidst their
prostitutes.
others?
Let's do that one. What do you think he's trying
But
to
okay, but
say
again,
there
think about this. When did you ever see an example where it happens?
in the Bible
I mean, Jesus also says, cut off your right
throughout
hand
history?
if it causes you sin. Do you think he actually means go get a saw and saw off your right hand? Or
Some
is he
people
making a
have done
point?
it. Some people have gouged out their
I know, but
eyeballs because it says so. So I mean, how are we supposed to know if
but
it's
just
literal or
because,
just a story? You know?
and that's the thing that I am open to saying, I don't always
Yeah.
know. So then I have to operate with, okay, if Jesus says all of this can be summed up in love God and love your neighbor,
You're
then
just
I
gonna take
have
it.
to then read back into that and go, there's something about this that it's trying to communicate to me
Hmm.
about loving other people and loving God that I'm clearly not getting because I'm assuming that
Hmm.
he's trying to tell me to kill a prostitute. Well, he's obviously not actually telling me to go kill a prostitute because if he was, one, we'd see the Bible riddled with the slaughtering of prostitutes and that held up as like a good thing. And we don't.
Non-believers,
So that
believers of other gods.
what
We see God slaughtering the believers of other gods all over the place. We see God telling people to slaughter the believers of the guys who believe other
well,
gods
so we could have a
all over the
whole nother
place.
podcast on Genesis
Hmm.
9. I think it's
Hmm.
9 of angels mating with women and the Nephilim and like we could have a
Which God
whole
knew would happen.
podcast
He
just
allowed
on
it to
that.
happen. He says, "Go ahead,
I know,
breed."
but again, this
It's
goes
all part of
back
the
to we
plan.
come from
You know, it's all
well, but
part of the
again, this
plan.
goes back to two very different assumptions that we have.
Hmm.
You assume that everything he's doing is bad and he's this evil,
We can
angry,
agree that
wicked
drowning
dude.
children is bad, though, Christopher. I don't have to assume that. We can agree on that. We can both look at each other and go, drowning kids is bad, and go, yes, we agree. We can agree.
Yes.
Correct. So it's not assuming. I'm not assuming that
But
these
this
things are
also,
bad. We
but
know that these
I
things are
know,
bad.
but I think the thing that I don't see, I don't hear from you is acknowledging our human involvement in those tragedies. The
So I'm
Bible
not going to
does
blame
not, a
us.
lot of these stories,
Yeah, I'm
but you
not going
see,
to blame
there's,
us for pissing God off because he's so weak that he gets so upset if we don't love him. He gets so upset if we worship another God. He gets so upset if there's a prostitute. Watch out. Burn it. I mean,
see, and I
stone
just don't see
disobedient
that. I
children.
don't see,
Christopher.
that's not the
So
God that I read
bad.
in the Bible. I really don't. I really don't. And I've read it multiple times through. I
Have you
don't,
read
and
those
again,
verses?
I can agree to disagree on it. I really can.
100%.
I
Yeah.
can
But have
say,
you read those verses, though, where he tells to
yes,
stone disobedient children?
yes.
So you've
I
read those
have, and
verses.
I
How do
don't
you?
see any examples where that's actually what's happening. And the one example I can think of is where there's the one guy in the camp who does something.
He
We
picks
don't
up
really
sticks
quite know what happens.
on a
Again,
Sunday.
and again, we don't know all the details of what's going on into that. And that's where, to me, I think we fill in a lot of details. And the difference is you can fill in all the details.
Hmm.
And I've just seen this with human behavior. We have a
Hmm.
terrible habit as humans of filling in all the details with the things that confirm our beliefs. So if you believe God's an angry, vengeful God who kills children, who just kills people who just don't do what he wants, and he's this, then you're going to read that into those texts.
Yes.
And I've
Let's.
made it, and through me, I don't see that same thing, looking at the same text that you have
Yeah.
and wrestling through them and going, I don't get it.
Yeah.
You know, why does Elisha say something and bears come out of nowhere and attack a bunch? Like, what?
Yeah.
Like,
He
what
called
is it?
down
And I
God.
can't make sense of it.
Yeah. He called
And
God
I
down to
can't make
possess the
sense of it.
bears, and God says, "Okay, I'll do it." Doop, doop, doop. And he just does it.
And that's where, again, I look at it and go, I can't understand it.
Yeah.
But
But you're
my
going to believe it.
reading of it and my understanding is he's not up there just like snotty little kids. Let me send a bunch of bears to maul them to death.
No, he got possessed. He possessed the bears. Yeah, that's an interesting story for sure. It doesn't make any sense why God would
It's a
allow
weird one.
himself. Well, there's a lot of weirder ones that Abraham, Moses with the circumcision. But I want to go back to the Numbers
why
15.
Zipporah shows up, why Abraham. I mean, I understand, honestly,
I
I
love these.
understand the one with Abraham taking Isaac.
Hmm.
I get it. It's weird. Like,
Yeah.
why on earth God would do it and why he would choose to use that as a way to
That,
see
oh, yeah,
Abraham,
no.
how far are you willing to go with me? Like, I don't get it.
That's
But
disgusting.
this is where I look at it and go,
what do you do
there's
with
something
that?
bigger I don't understand. There's something bigger I don't
So if it
understand.
doesn't make sense to you,
and I can hold that intention.
You're holding in that there's something bigger that you don't understand, no matter how egregious it looks, such as God asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac to him. And Abraham's like, oh, okay, doop doop doop. A lot of that doop doop doop
No,
in the
it's
Bible.
not. So I don't think that's fair. I think that's
Yeah.
unfair because I do spend a lot of time thinking and meditate and studying this stuff. And I think what I see differently is that one, you can look into all these stories and you can get, and this is what I do with everything. I look at, well, what do atheists think about this? What do, Jewish scholars think about this? What do Christians think about this? And then sit on it. And sometimes I'm like, this doesn't make any sense, but can it make sense? Can it make sense in a way that God is loving and just?
No.
And historically, I've always been able to find a way where I go, okay, I still don't get it, but I can see a way in which that would be done in some bizarre, loving, just way that I just can't make sense of.
Yeah, I can't wrap my head around that. Numbers 15, 32 through 36. While the Israelites were in the wilderness, a man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Dum, dum, dum. Yep. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and they kept him in custody because it was not clear what should be done with him. Then the Lord said to Moses, now these are Lord's commands. This is God, perfect, righteous, and good. Yep. The man must die. The whole assembly must stone him outside the camp. So they did it. They did as the Lord commanded. Great. Because he picked up sticks on Sunday or Sabbath, whatever day the Sabbath is.
So that one in particular, okay.
Yeah. What happened there? How am I getting it wrong?
You reading it in your reaction, I can read your bias right into it.
I don't like people being killed for stupid reasons. That's my bias.
But you assume you have all the details. That story does not give us very many details.
What detail am I missing that makes that sound better? What did God leave out?
What I'm saying is God had specific instructions. Whatever the story around this is, this individual said, screw you, God.
Yeah. I'm going to pick up sticks on Sunday. I'm cold. I'm going to make a fire. I'm hungry. I'm going to make some food.
And again, you're assuming that in general, he's a pretty good guy. And overall, he's doing all these other good things. And he is submissive and he does follow by God's rule. He made this one mistake and picked up sticks and God zapped him. I don't see it that way. I look at it and go, well, I don't know who this guy is. I don't know what he's like in general, but clearly something that is clearly instructed. Here's someone who goes, this God of Israel, stupid. If I want to make a fire, I'm going to make a fire. Like, right. I don't care what you think.
Exactly.
And God goes, well, okay.
Now I'm mad.
You want to play by your own rules.
My feelings are hurt.
He says, if you want to play by your rules, I don't think it's that. I think he goes, you want to play by your own rules? And God can see it on a cosmic timeline and goes, you are ultimately going to reject me. Let's speed up the process.
Wow. My kid's going to be an asshole when he's 35, so we might as well just drown him now and get rid of that. Does that help?
I think that's a gross oversimplification. And I think anybody you can use things and say, and again, would I ever go drown my kid? Of course not.
But it's okay if God does it, though, and it's loving and just and righteous and good.
But I don't think God goes and grabs somebody's head and then sticks their head in the water. I think
he opens the floodgates and lets it do it.
Your kid goes, I want to do this. And they go do it. And God says, I don't want you to, and I want you to come back. I'm willing to invite you back. All you have to do is say, let me back. And you're welcome anytime. And we have a terrible history going all the way back of saying, screw you, God. I want nothing to do with you.
So God steps
loves
in.
us enough to say, so God loves us enough to say, if that's the choice you make, and that's the choice that you make.
Then I'm going to ask these people
And
over
I
here
actually
to kill
see that
you.
as loving. No, I see that as loving. If ultimately you decide you want nothing to do with him, he'll give it to you. And
I'm glad I'm not your kid. That's a little scary to me. That's scaring me.
I think you may be oversimplifying, and you've done a lot of hyperbole to try and paint it as this
It paints itself,
aggressive,
Christopher. I'm
wicked.
just reading it. I'm just reading it, how it's painted.
But you just said you wouldn't want to be my kid. So
I
now you're
wouldn't,
making
'cause
it
you-
personal. Like I'm
You were
I'm
saying
saying if
that,
my kids grew up, if my kids grew up
yeah.
and they completely rejected me, I would love them enough to respect them and say,
Oh,
if
okay.
you
Well,
completely
you wouldn't hurt them or
reject
harm
me,
them. Then it's fine. Yeah, that's
but
different.
but
But that's different.
I'm
See,
using
you
that
don't
as an
step in.
example.
Yeah, and I like that example. It's a good example. So what God does instead is he steps in and kills you. This is what's happening here with the
No,
guy in the sticks.
but see, that's where we disagree and we differ on this. Because to me, it's not he steps in and kills you. You
he
said, I
steps
want
out.
nothing to do with you. And he says, okay.
So he
And what
allows you to be
you
killed.
he allows
Instead of
you to collapse
stopping
in
it.
on yourself.
Gotcha. So instead of
'Cause that's
stopping
what
and
you
saving
wanted.
you, no, I didn't. I'd like to be saved. But I don't care who
But-
saves me. I would just like to be saved at some
I
point.
know, but
when
you
I'm
want to do it your own way.
in danger.
You want to do it your own way by your rules because you think God's
don't
rules are
care.
stupid and you want to
Look,
do
you
it.
can use
I
a
know, but
rope,
that's
you can use a boat, you can use a parachute. I don't care how you save me. Just save me. Just well,
But you
actually,
don't
I do
wanna do
care.
it-
Don't shed the blood of the innocent to save me. There's one right there. Just don't save me at that point. That's ridiculous. Don't kill
But
the
see, that's-
innocent
and-
to save me.
but I mean, again, but that's what you're saying. You're saying I've interpreted what you do. I've made a judgment on who you are as God.
Yes.
I know better and I want nothing to do with you.
Yes.
So by that path, he is absolutely going to allow you to do that. And
Right, but he's going to
"Okay,
kill me.
No, you're going to kill yourself.
I'm not going to kill myself, Christopher. That's not how that works.
It will collapse in on itself. You will allow your own destruction.
That's a
You
lot.
will invite
That's
your
a
own
lot.
destruction in.
That's a lot. And God doesn't. And yeah.
I mean, again, it's like AI. It's like AI. You can
Yeah.
say, "Well, I'm just
Oh.
gonna feed into it, and I'm just gonna keep going into it, and I'm gonna let it feed my own desires, and it will kill you. It will
What about
destroy
an AI that has a God complex that thinks that everybody that doesn't love it deserves to die? Would we
Well,
find that a good
again,
component?
I guess it depends on your interpretation of it, but I don't think man can make an AI that actually would be actually just and benevolent and loving. I don't think we can do it because
I don't
we're
think-
broken.
Yeah. Well, I don't think
I
drowning
think
kids
we're
is
broken.
loving and benevolent either, or killing them in their sleep because their parents worship the wrong God. I don't think that is benevolent or worthy of worship for sure. So last thing though is the free will part. You've mentioned a couple times free will. Do you think God
Yeah.
steps in and says things, does things? Well, obviously he kills people. He steps in and interferes. Does he step in and change things? Does he change hearts and minds? What do you
I think
think?
he gives us opportunities. I think
So-
I again going back
So
to
he
my
steps in
19
and
years
gives
old.
us those opportunities. So God
He
does
gives us
give
those
us
opportunities to say, again, I go back to the bridge example. I had a choice. He said,
something,
doesn't have to
somebody.
be this way.
We don't know if it was him.
It doesn't have to be this way.
There was no name tag
I
on the
still
light.
could have said, screw you, I'm going to do it.
Right.
And he would have said, okay, if that's what you want.
Right. But
then
he's not going
that's-
to send water towards you to drown you in the middle of it. He's not going to kill you in your sleep. Right. So he's not going to interfere that way. But he does interfere in the past with other people. Even Saul, right? So Saul to Paul. Correct?
Okay.
He showed up for him and changed his mind and all that because he actually showed up.
He didn't change his mind. I don't think he
didn't.
changed his mind. I think Paul
So he was
changed his mind. I think Paul
right,
came to
because
the
Jesus came
conclusion-
down and talked to him. That's what changed his mind, was Jesus actually showing
But
up and
how many
talking to
other
him, right?
people saw what Jesus did and didn't change their mind?
Okay.
I mean, people literally saw. People
This is a
literally
dead guy
saw-
showing up, though.
But
right?
think about who is his friend, Mary. Who's the other dude he raised from the dead?
I know the guy. Yeah. But
He-
regardless,
dude raises from the dead, walks out,
right?
and people still reject Jesus. And
Jim
go,
Jones
he's,
did
he's,
miracles.
He's possessed by a
I reject Jim
demon.
Jones. I reject
Okay.
Jim Jones. Just saying, he does miracles too. I've seen lots of pastors perform, quotes, miracles. Doesn't mean that they're Jesus or they actually have any physical powers. Do you believe Jim Jones had any powers?
I don't know anything about Jim Jones.
Jim Jones is the Kool-Aid guy, the cult. Do you remember that?
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I don't.
Well,
So I'm not familiar with that piece.
He got a lot of people to commit suicide because they were all going to go to heaven, or I can't remember exactly what it was. But he convinced a lot of people that he was,
and I have no doubt people went for it
because he performed miracles. So just because somebody says they perform miracles or somebody says they saw somebody do a miracle doesn't mean that it actually happened. Correct?
True.
Right. So I can't believe that Jesus did miracles, and some of those people over there probably did the same thing. Oh yeah, it's probably just a trick. That person wasn't blah 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 blah.
But that's really not. That's a choice in your decisions and how you.
That's God's choice.
I've looked at the same, but I know, but this is with the whole free will thing. I've looked at the same things you have, wrestled with the same things you have, and I've come to a different conclusion. And we see that not just in biblical stuff. Think about politics. People look at the same things all the time, and they land on different political spectrums.
Doesn't make any sense to me. Have you heard that man talk? Have you heard him speak words? Anyways, we don't do that.
Believe
here.
me, we don't get. Yeah, we don't need to get into that. But I agree. There's, and just so you know, if you think I'm a Trumper, believe me, I'm not. So it's one of those things.
I think that's what
I look at this, and this is where sometimes I look at conservatives and go, "What are you doing?
What is wrong?"
Yeah. Yes.
That's to me.
But that's where I actually enjoy conversations like this, where we can wrestle through some of these things and go, "Hey, I look at the same stuff you do. I've struggled with it. I've wrestled with it, and I've come to a different conclusion." And I'm okay with that. And I don't need to leave a conversation with you and go, "Well, I didn't put another point on the board." It's like, well, that's what a stupid way to live life. Like, I just know that, hey, this is where I've come based on my experience and the things that I've been through, and the time and energy that I put into trying to make sense of what, I'll be honest, is often inconceivable, quoting from The Princess Bride.
Love it. Anybody want a peanut? No. Thank you so much, Christopher. This has been a blast. We're going to go ahead and end it here. Any last words, and where can we find your stuff at?
No, I mean, I like I said, I genuinely have enjoyed our conversation. And if anything, I wish people spent more time in conversations like this, because I think we do need to wrestle through these things. Whether you come to the conclusion I do or the conclusion you do, I think it helps when we talk about this and wrestle with it. So no, I mean, to people listening or watching, you can find my stuff. Really, my goal is to try and help people make sense of this technology. So I'm on YouTube. I have a podcast, Future Focused. And yeah, no, I really don't. I just genuinely appreciate you making the time and engaging in this, because I really do appreciate these conversations, as hard as they can be sometimes when you're like, how can we see it so differently? And it's like, I don't know. We just do.
Yeah. And that's the best answer.
We can still laugh and enjoy a conversation together and laugh about some of the ridiculous things that comes out of that man's mouth and go, well, okay.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Christopher. This has been a blast. Stay safe out there. We'll keep in touch.
All right.
That's all the show there is for you today. Thanks for listening. As always, you can find all things BSW related on the show's website at thebiblesayswhat.com. If you like what you heard and want to help keep the recording light on, simply go to thebiblesayswhat.com and sign up to be a supporter of the show. Your episodic tithes of $1 or more will get you early access to each episode on Wednesdays instead of Sundays. And no matter which platform you use to listen to your podcast, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss out on the next episode. Until then, have a great week. Next time on The Bible Says What?
We would be all over the place if I was God. Like I would have a mermaid tail. I love that, walking on land and you dry and have feet and then you go in. I would have all kinds. be able to fly, just everything.
All right, that's it. You can be God for a day. I will allow it. I'll allow it.
See,
That sounds fun.
see, and it would rain Skittles.
Oh
And
no, even better.
yes,
Oh, I
rain
love it.
Skittles. See, I know. And then how all the trees probably would die because it's not getting water
Well,
because I wanted to
Just
rain
for a day,
Skittles.
though. You could be God
It's
for a
just too
day.
much.
That's it, just for a day.